Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you, excuse me, to Seaside UCC's weekly virtual forum that we're holding every Friday. Of course, the minute we start recording, I can't talk. That we're hosting every Friday during this time of pandemic and physical distancing, trying to provide an opportunity for us, staff, partners, donors, friends, volunteers, to learn from one another and share our experiences and how we're coping with the current situation, and most importantly, how it's impacting the work of our partners around the world. Today, we're thrilled to have as our main speaker, Alyssa Bovell, who's been a member of the IPM team for a number of years now, and for the last few years has been working from Atlanta, Georgia, where she just completed a master's in international development with a focus, I believe, I'll let her tell you exactly, on gender equity and issues related to the impact that development practices can have both in a positive and negative way on the opportunities for women and girl children around the world. Alyssa has served IPM in a number of capacities, going back to our 40th anniversary General Assembly, where she was the primary coordinator of that activity. She continued later as the Immersion Experience Coordinator and also the Director of our relationships with our project partners. And she's been succeeded in that role by Adela Zayas, who's on the call right now, and in the Immersion Experience role by Vicky Jimenez, who many of you heard from last Friday, who's a wonderful new addition to the staff. Alyssa is currently serving as a consultant from Atlanta, using the education that she acquired at Emory and the experience she's had with IPM and her time at the University of Dayton and living abroad and working abroad with IPM to help inform how we're responding to not only COVID-19, but how we see IPM's partnership role as we move forward and look forward to our anniversary in 2024. As some of you may recall, she was charged at the last General Assembly at our 45th anniversary to prepare a report around monitoring and evaluation, assessment and learning related to our work with our project partners as we look to redefine and deepen what we mean by partnership in the next 50 years of this organization's tenure. I say with a wink and Carol with a smile. But when COVID hit, we sort of immediately had a conversation about whether or not that research was appropriate and that perhaps it would be more helpful in the short term to gain a better understanding of how our regional staff and partners were adapting to this, once in a lifetime, we hope, situation that we've all been going through. So she's been working hand in hand with me and with our international staff team, particularly Adela, who's on the call, Mahesh, who many of you know, who's the Regional Director for South Asia, Aneda and Vicky, the two new members of the team in El Salvador, and other folks like Sony and Hemed and Jared in countries like India, Nepal, and Kenya. And we're really excited to be able to have her share her experience and what she's learned so far. This research is just in the beginning stages, but we think it's vitally important as IPM sort of moves through this difficult period and imagines how we might refine our mission and particularly our work for the next half century. Alyssa is a wonderful young woman. Many of you know I've known her almost her entire life, and it's just always a really an honor and privilege for me to be able to have her work alongside me as the member, and all of us as a member of the IPM family. So I'd like to turn it over to Alyssa Bovell at this time. And I would ask that you mute your phone or your computer screen during her presentation. We will project it on the screen. Hopefully you can all share that now. And we are recording this and now live on Facebook as well. So thank you all for being here and joining us for this week's forum.
Thanks, Joe. And can I just get a confirmation that everybody can see the screen? If anybody just wants to type in the chat or to get yourself off mute, and you can let me know.
I can, Ellie.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so thank you all again for your attendance and participation in this week's Friday Forum. Yeah, as you know, my name is Alyssa, and as Joe mentioned, since 2014, I've been connected to IPM through a variety of different roles, as he mentioned, coordinating immersion experiences, working directly with project partners, planning the first General Assembly, and, as Joe mentioned, I'm currently supporting monitoring, evaluation, and learning efforts with regional offices and project partners. So this week, I'm going to be focusing the discussion on how IPM is collecting evidence and conducting research during COVID-19. I want to give everybody a bit of a disclaimer that this week's forum might be a bit more process focused, but I hope to make this as interesting and as engaging as possible as I share about this approach and that we're taking to understand the short and potential long-term impacts of this pandemic that in the communities that IPM's supporting. So as Joe mentioned, this research process is currently unfolding. And so as I share throughout the discussion, if there are questions, comments, insights, I would love to see anybody utilize the chat feature in Zoom, but I will also leave space for questions at the end. Thanks, Margie and Mickey, for already kickstarting off the chat. It's true, Mickey was my first roommate during my immersion experience in El Salvador back in 2014. So let's see. So why are we having this discussion? It's really important to think about research, not only just as it's the findings that generate from research, but also its process. It's really easy to say, just do it, find out what's going on. But when I was first tasked with this, we recognized that there's very limited information for us to go off of in terms of looking at existing literature, because we've never experienced a global health situation of this scale, not only in our lifetimes, but in the organization's lifetime. So how do we engage in multi-regional research during a pandemic? How do we conduct interviews with social distancing, or when there's limited access to internet to engage virtually? All of these things and components that we had to consider as we attempted to understand how this is affecting our project partner communities. Furthermore, this time is more important than ever that we consider and center ethical principles of research into our practice. So mapping our process is also an attempt to understand how are we centering equity and inclusive research practices throughout this process. It can seem like the research process is really straightforward. You decide on a question, you pick an appropriate method, you can collect and analyze your data and report your findings, but there's so much more nuance involved. And so today I'm going to be looking at the approach and the strategies that we're taking along, as well as data collection opportunities and challenges. So before we get there, I want to talk about a couple of grounding questions. Next slide, please. So it was really important to me before we started with this process to think about, for whom are we conducting this research? Who are we doing this for? It's really important for us as an organization to ensure that we're centering project partner communities in all aspects of this process. Research itself can be very extractive, meaning that we're taking up an individual's time, their knowledge and insights, and for whose gain? How are we bringing research and findings back to the communities that we've extracted knowledge and insights from? The second grounding question is, who are we engaging with to implement this research and how? I want to, emphasize that this process isn't being done by me alone, as Joe mentioned. This is a collaborative effort between myself, Mahesh, Anita, and Adela. And without our regional staff, I don't think we would be able to have this process to be as equitable as it is, because they have the most in-depth understanding of the communities that we're serving. And the last grounding question is, to what extent? Who is benefiting from this information? Something that I've learned is that, researcher accountability is really important. You consider sharing data and information and knowledge. When you think about how people make decisions about, their lives or the projects that they're working for, it's with knowledge and information. And so making sure that we are transparent in the process and also in our opportunities to share our findings is really important. And lastly, making sure that as we think about benefit and as we think about what this information is going to be used for, that we consider that actionable recommendations. So, as we are gathering insights and information from project partner communities, how can we use that information and develop recommendations that the organization itself can use to better enhance the strategies that they're using to work with individuals and communities on the ground? Next slide, please. So, all these research principles have been over, research, working with other organizations, kind of understanding other practices. But here is a list of different principles that I've found important to center this process in. And it's sort of a mix that is included at all stages of this process. So the first one is collaboration and participatory research. I think it's really important, and IPM has a very unique foundation that is built on relationships with existing project partner communities. So research itself should be focused on leveraging those existing relationships for evidence generation. It should be strengths focused, actively building and valuing experience. Research is not meant to be conducted on individuals, but with them. So how are we making sure that our regional staff and project partner communities are involved in and collaborating in every step of this process? The second principle is to make sure that the research is intersectional. The term intersectionality was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's important to recognize that this research acknowledges and actively seeks to kind of understand the different identities of the communities that we're working with. So not just related to gender, but also to class, varying from ability, sexual orientation, age, etc. We want to make sure that this process acknowledges and seeks to address, power and also the power and privilege bestowed upon someone like me, who's a university educated researcher from a high income country who's now been tasked with this. I want to make sure that this process is also grounded in understanding my reality is different from the individuals that we're working with. So that being the case, how are we making sure that intersectionality is centered in the work that we're doing, not only in a way to kind of understand diverse realities across social identity, but also to make sure that, my experience isn't being solely projected on this process. The third one, which is pretty common for a lot of research practices, is informed consent. We want to make sure that participants have the right to be informed about, what their participation is going to be used for, how this data is going to be collected, what's going to happen afterwards with this information, whether or not their name is going to be attached and connected to it, but also to make sure that participants have the right to decide whether or not to participate in the activity. I think a lot of people have the perception that just because we're supporting certain project communities, they are responsible to give us this information, and that's not necessarily the case. That doesn't really center equitable principles of research practice. So that's also really important. And also to make sure that, anybody who does provide information or insights or knowledge to this process has the right to be provided with the results of this activity. So what was the end result? What was the finding of it? How is this information going to be used moving forward? And to make sure that feedback mechanism is built into the process. And that ties directly into privacy and confidentiality, as I mentioned, making sure that appropriate data collection and storage practices are used to make sure that the participant has, the option of keeping their information private and confidential. This is also a very unique time that we're in, and centering safety is really important. As I mentioned before, we're in a weird situation where we're trying to figure out, how do you collect data when you're not able to connect with people in person, but not only making sure that we're safe during this time, but also considering the way in which technology is used, and so not to encounter any sort of security risks as a result of a participant involving themselves in this data collection effort. So again, due to social distancing and a lot of stay-at-home orders that are in place in certain parts of the world, we aren't attempting to conduct in-person interviews or household surveys. And so I'll talk a little bit later about some of the creative ways we're trying to collect data. The next one is data minimization. We want to make sure that whatever we're collecting, whatever we've decided to focus on, is relevant to project community need. As I mentioned before, research can be really extractive, and so this cannot just be solely for the interest of what we hope to figure out. We can't look at everything, we can't ask all the questions. So what are we focusing on, and what is going to be relevant to the future of IPM and in the organizations that we're serving? And also making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. If there is information that we've collected in the past that is somewhat relevant to now, that's not the case given the uniqueness of COVID-19, but in any other situation, is there information that we have already that's relevant that means we don't have to risk data fatigue or individuals being disinterested in participating in a similar process. The next one relates to accountability as researchers. We want to make sure that however the data is collected and that we're establishing procedures to ensure that it's used appropriately, it's stored securely. We're making sure that whenever there's no longer use for this information, it's disposed of, especially because it can tie individuals and specific responses to communities, and we don't want to again put anybody in unnecessary risk. And finally, this last point is maybe more for me than anybody else, but perhaps because I'm probably most unfamiliar with the particular realities of what it's like to experience COVID-19 in some of the places that we're working, I want to make sure that I don't remain rigid in how I imagine this process unfolding, but I'm open to new opportunities to learn and adapt from this process. Next slide, please. So that leads us to the research questions that we've developed and are attempting to understand. As you can see, what are the different of the COVID-19 pandemic, both potential on women, men, girls, and boys, and other vulnerable demographics? How are project partners responding to this outbreak? What capacities does IPM have to support project partner responses to the virus outbreak? What gaps exist? And how do IPMs assist the organization adapting to post-COVID-19 reality, and what contingency plans are being considered that are responsive to future risks? So we have a diverse methodology that we're working on currently. There's a survey with regional staff that we're going to be working on. Right now, we're in the process of doing sort of like individual testimonies with project coordinators, fellows, and participants. We're going to be looking at sort of tracking project partner funding and material support, material and emotional support during this time from the start of the pandemic to the end of this research exercise. And I hope to do, and this is still in the process of development, but is to get to that last research question, how do we focus on imagining a more resilient future? So, I'm thinking about imagining an exercise with IPM stakeholders that focuses on an appreciative inquiry, focusing on recognizing and leveraging the current strengths that we have to consider how to best prepare for a post-COVID reality. Because as we all know, we have no idea what this is going to look like following this pandemic, and even, perhaps what normal is going to be after this. Next slide, please. So, as we think about the methodology, it's also important to recognize that this unique situation poses both opportunities and challenges for collecting data and understanding how we're then analyzing the data and then sharing our findings to develop actionable recommendations. I'm going to start off with the challenges. First, it would be technology. I think we've joked several times that technology is great until it's not great. It helps you to connect with people across different, but there are still technical capacities that are in some of the places that we're working in. So given social distancing again and those stay-at-home orders, it makes in-person exercises or interviews almost impossible. And so we want to prioritize the safety of our project communities and our participants and our researchers. So this comes with discussions on, again, data privacy and confidentiality. Technology is great, but there's a lot of information that's stored and saved in different parts of web that we have no idea what it's being used for. So making sure that we're prioritizing that safety as well. The next point is both, I think, a challenge, but also shifts us into our opportunities. As we all know, the situation is unfolding currently and changing, by week or by day, you could even say. This research process that IPM is trying to do is an open-ended attempt to think about current realities, but also future possibilities. And now that comes with challenges as we're attempting to conduct a multi-country, multi-regional process. And the realities of our project partners shouldn't be genius, so we'll have to be considering how this is affecting each of them uniquely. But as we think about these challenges, there's also so many opportunities. As you can see, I've listed more opportunities than I've listed challenges. Given social distancing and taking into consideration access to technology, time, literacy levels, we're using platforms like WhatsApp and voice notes to allow for sharing of responses and testimonies. And we're doing this as we attempt to work with participants, our project communities, to make this as most a convenient experience as possible. Because as I mentioned before, data collection can be very extractive. And this relies on centering their local knowledge and expertise. So that, what might work for one country, or what might even work within one country might look different. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible about our data collection methods. I'm also currently reading this book called Data Feminine by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein, and it talks about centering local and indigenous forms of knowledge and knowledge collection that deviate from typical understandings of like what good and clean data might look to our North American standards. And in this, we're trying to rethink this typical research hierarchy. So it's just really important that we make sure that we understand that these individuals who we're collecting information from, they're the experts to what's happening in their local communities. I have an idea of what I hope to understand, but I also, again, have to be flexible in my process to make sure that I'm not missing out on a learning opportunity because I've stuck to a rigid process. The next one, again, is the integration of gender sensitive and feminist research principles. That also aligns with the previous point, but it's about, making sure that we're thinking about diverse perspectives, focusing on, understanding what the experience is like for different vulnerable communities, and adapting to that process. So, that these individuals have the power to participate, the power to share, the right to know the findings, and to use that information to also support their work, and making sure that's integrated in our process. And embracing learning along the way. As I mentioned, this is an iterative approach, but at every step, it's important to remember those core questions that I mentioned before and grounding them within our process. And adapting and learning along the way will give us insights into, what's working, what can be some promising practices, and what could be done better. Just the other day, we had a call as we piloted the interview guide in El Salvador, and we recognized that, something needed to change. There were some questions that weren't being in a way that I had imagined, or that, Adele and Anita had imagined as well. So how do we shift that along the way to make sure that we're adapting our process for the best data collection formats as possible? And finally, as I mentioned before, leveraging current information generated. We can't ask everything. This research practice is going to be an imperfect process that won't include everything that I think we all hope to understand. But there are other organizations and institutions that are trying to figure out different questions that we might be unable to ask. So I was watching a webinar on monitoring evaluation recently, and they were sharing that in the past months, so many different papers have been published and platform generated in terms of understanding what this situation looks like across different demographics, what COVID looks like, and how to understand how this pandemic is affecting individuals across gender, age, race, and other demographics. And it's quite interesting to see in the hubs that have been generated as a result of this. And I'd be happy to share some of those platforms if anybody's interested. But using those opportunities, using organizations who have also access to similar communities or similar parts of the world who have a more focused set of information that has already been published. So how do we leverage those knowledge sharing opportunities? Next slide, please. And so as we think about this process as a whole, I just also wanted to give you all an update on where we're at currently. Again, this webinar is really focused on process, and I hope that there's another time where I can share more on findings and results and recommendations as a result of what we've discovered. But right now, we're kind of at the point where we're conducting individual testimony exercises with project coordinators. We're hoping that then those project coordinators can be conducting interviews with project participants. So an opportunity for not only knowledge sharing, but capacity bridging with these individuals. We're going to be then conducting surveys with regional staff members, and then that's going to involve lots of translation, coding, and analysis. That's going to end up with a final report and recommendations. And, that's all to be done internally, but something that, again, as I wanted to prioritize in the principles mentioned previously, it's really important that we also then share those, share whatever has this process with you know, the project communities that we have worked with and who have spent so much time and energy in sharing their knowledge and insights with us. So I am going to ask Ilse to go to the next slide. Yeah, that's really just an opportunity for us to explain our process, but I also really wanted to take a moment and recognize that, again, this is not something that I am doing alone. This would not be even remotely possible if it wasn't for, you know, Mahesh, Adela, and Aneta, who have not only been responsible for helping develop the approach questions that the organization is taking, but also coming up with a specific methodology and understanding our data collection processes. So yeah, I will now open it up for questions or comments or insights or anything else for other individuals who have had experience conducting research across different parts of the world. Oh, I see there was a question from Mickey. Hold on one second. So Mickey's asking, what number of service questionnaires will you consider sufficient to draw conclusions? That is a really great question, Mickey. So in terms of our methodology, and I didn't want to get too technical into this, but we're currently, meaning that we're starting off with project coordinators and then transitioning into a position where they are recommending other individuals who will be able to provide additional to us until we are at a point where we reach data saturation, meaning that we have heard a series of insights, but we're at a point where we're not gleaming any new knowledge or information. Now, we haven't set a particular number, meaning that we're definitely going to be interviewing all of our project coordinators as a start, and hopefully we can convince each project coordinator to be willing to interview project participants as well. So I can't give you an exact number, but I have one in my mind I don't want to share, but I will share once we get to a point where we are able to share findings and more on this process. And now I'd also invite anybody to ask any other questions, or, you know, if anything was unclear. I know that, again, this is a little bit technical and maybe a little bit more dry than what you're used to, but I think it's really important that we also find space to talk about what we're doing and what's working.
Alyssa, can I jump in just for a second? I tried to say this earlier. You might have seen my mouth moving, but I had you muted. I just want to make sure that the people that are following on Facebook, there's quite a number there, know that they can type in a question to the chat function, and I'll relay it to Alyssa while we're having this conversation, since I'm monitoring that feed as well. Please, everyone else, go ahead.
Oh, it's Carol. I just want to express my amazement and just from what we were 20 years ago to be involved in something this monumental at a time like this, and having IPM leading the way. Thank you. I could have never imagined it. So it's a long journey, but thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I don't know that we're leading the way, but I want to echo that. And, you know, in the sense that we're really, you and I had a bit of a conversation last week about Vicky's presentation. And one of the things that's really been the most edifying and rewarding for me over the past few years is all the young energy and commitment and experience that you can, you know, hear in Alyssa's voice. You could hear in Vicky's and Adela's and Mahesh's. Earlier, Aneta next week. You can see Sarah on the call as well. So we're just, I don't want to speak for Elsa and Mahesh and some of the older folks that have been around a while, but we're really feeling incredibly fortunate to have this kind of energy and expertise and commitment coming from our younger staff members and our partners around the world, and their willingness to collaborate with us.
This is what was envisioned. 1974.
Yeah, well, Alyssa can speak to that. Yeah, I mean, she has a good sense of the history and obviously embodies our mission in so many ways. So I think it's really wonderful for her to be helping to facilitate, you know, or facilitating this process for us. But I don't want to steal her forum here, so I'm gonna mute myself or let her talk.
No, that's all right. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Carol. Yeah, I also noticed a couple chats pop in, and I also want to echo something that Mahesh said, if anybody hasn't seen it, but he shared that, that, you know, they're in a point where they're in the midst of relief work and emergency responses. And that's also something that I didn't really talk about as much when I was how this process is unfolding, as some of the challenges of data collection. But it really is essential to consider that this is an COVID-19 and is only amplifying existing realities and in a lot of ways amplifying existing vulnerabilities. A lot of the challenges that project partner communities have faced prior to this, it doesn't stop because this is happening. And, you know, I think we've had a lot of discussions around how privileged we are to talk about social distancing in places where that's not just due to structure and other reasons. But yeah, it's important to recognize that as we talk about research processes and monitoring and evaluation, how we have to recognize that that has to be done around some of the really important priorities that take place, including emergency responses. So, you know, this is something, again, that goes back to my need to be able to adapt and learn, and not just sort of push for this to be done as soon as possible. Like I can't push, and it wouldn't be ethical for me to push all these interviews to be conducted right away, because there's a lot that's already going on in parts of the world that I can even begin to understand. And so that's why I'm really grateful and glad that this is done in collaboration with, you know, Mahesh and Adela and Anita and the entire team.
There's another question, Alyssa, I don't know if you can see it, about how you and I, but I'm going to let you respond, see this shaping the future of IPM's work. You know, I would just say to Margie that you've probably noticed that I haven't been referenced in much of this presentation, and that's intentional. I've really tried to keep complete distance from the entire conversation because I feel, as I know Alyssa does, that this really needs to come, if you will, bottom up. And our regional staff and our partners are really defining how we're going to collect the information, what information is going to be collected, and then clearly I'll play a role in how it's utilized for reforming or moderating, refining IPM's mission going forward. But I can't think of anything more important for us to be doing right now, particularly, as Mahesh said, we've sort of been forced into emergency relief, which is not our normal MO, but that's what's needed. And so we're trying to adjust as we can, also with an eye for the future, particularly as it relates to our partners in the Immersion Experience program, as Vicki so well spoke about last week. Alyssa, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question, Margie. It's hard to say, because until I really know kind of what themes come out of this, I can't really say how it should, how it's going to shape the future of our work. Really depend on the recommendations that generate from this process. But I will say that, if anything, and I don't think this is just for IPM, but this has made it really clear that a lot of risk reduction and resiliency work is not a norm for a lot of organizations that be focused solely on emergency relief work. So kind of understanding not only the nature of what it means to be an organization that's supporting groups of people in different parts of the world in the unique way that we do, you know, how that shifts, how that changes, what that's going to look like moving forward, but also kind of understanding what this means for, you know, advocacy efforts when you can't gather or you're too scared to gather, or what this means for the fabric of trust that is typical within a community but now has broken down due to social distancing or other areas, you know, vulnerable areas because of this pandemic. So it's really hard to say for now. I'm kind of taking an approach where I'm just letting the information speak to me before I can see how it's going to shift what I imagine could be a possibility for the future work of the organization. And I think that, again, goes back to my interest and need for this to be like a learning and adaptive process. But I think that's kind of I think that's the most important part of it, right? If we aren't learning and adapting because of the information that we generated, then, you know, research holds, I think, little purpose.
Maybe I'll just add, I said I would not
No, go
speak too
ahead.
much, but just since there's quite a few board members on, along with all the other folks on Facebook and online here, um, we clearly see this structure, as we were talking about before we went live on Facebook, of this research process sort of leading up to what we planned for an autumn, what would be an autumn in North America, October, November board meeting in India that we're rescheduling. But we also see it, so there'll be some reporting at that point, but we also see this rolling into whatever additional research around this monitoring, evaluation, assessment, and learning process that Alyssa is coordinating for the 50th anniversary coming up in 2024. So this seemed like the perfect moment in a very imperfect world right now to try to gather this information and glean as much as we could, but also to help us prepare in the most appropriate and ethical and equitable way as possible, given this organization's history and structure, for what will happen beyond the 50th anniversary, beyond my tenure, beyond many of you as board members' tenure as well. So that's also part of why it's so exciting to have sort of the next generation of IPM leadership so intimately involved in the process.
Thanks, Joe. And there's also a comment from Mahesh. And I don't know, I don't feel like I should be reading your comments, Mahesh, but since you typed it, he wanted to share that, you know, he and Hemit feel that this is also a process of thinking and reflection for their teams, which is also really important. Reflexivity and research, and really thinking about the role that the research plays in the process is something that I have tried to do, particularly as I think about, you know, what it means, again, for me to be supporting the facilitation of this process in parts of the world that I have very little experience in beyond sort of immersions and other visits. But yeah, I think it's not only great for when research can be an opportunity to gather information that'll develop strategies and opportunities for different approaches in the future, leading the organization, you know, into a new future, but also brings value to the communities that they're serving. So as it being a reflective process, I think that makes me happy. That's something that excites me, and also I think would also feed back into opportunities for future understandings and future research that's affected.
Alyssa, there's a question on Facebook from Terry Matuku, I think you know, or know of, who currently lives in Toronto, but is from the Kandula village in Kenya, where many of the folks on the call have visited during immersions, and where I just spent a day with the Yale Divinity School students and Andover Newton Seminary students in January. She's just commenting on what a good conversation this is, but then asking, in a difficult situation, this is a difficult situation, particularly in rural areas. In Kenya, for example, all schools are closed. Kids can't afford online schooling. They're not allowed to gather for face-to-face schooling or even volunteer tutoring. What can we do? And that's a really difficult question. And I guess I would ask Mahesh and Adela, who are also on the call, to feel free as the regional directors for their parts of the world to comment if they have any thoughts in response to Terry's question, along with Alyssa.
I think, well, so given that Lydia Cajola is probably one of the maybe examples for this, I would defer to Adela. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I would defer to you to maybe share a little bit more about their approach of virtual learning.
And Adela, she's also asking, you know, sort of a follow-up question. I guess, you know, the feed's a little slower. What best practices can be applied from other countries? Lydia Cajola would be a great example to help kids and parents navigate this situation. So Adi, if you can unmute yourself, we'd love to hear what you think, or perspective from Mahesh or anyone else.
Hey everyone, it's been a pleasure to hear Alyssa during her presentation. Definitely we feel that this process is needed and very important to develop our organization and also to develop new processes and activities in the LAC region. And as far as the question, I think, as you were mentioning, Patronato Lydia Cajola has been doing remarkable job in terms of education virtually. Of course, many of you know that the classes has been canceled and no kids, no teachers are attending school. And this will be the case until at least December 2020. So we're hoping that this panorama will change on 2021, but we're still not sure. The activities and processes that Patronato Lidia Coyola has been organizing have been a really good team job. So all the teachers, all the staff at the Patronato Lidia Coyola have been gathering virtually through WhatsApp, through other different platforms, with the parents of the kids and the kids themselves to organize the material that they will be needing to continue their education virtually. I just want to clear and to clarify that many people inside the community, inside El Saite, where is Patronato Lidia Coyola is located in El Salvador, very close to the coast of the country, have not very good internet access. So many of the homeworks or the activities are shared through WhatsApp mainly with the parents, and then the parents are the ones that take care of the responsibility of the kids so that they can continue learning and with their activities. And I also think that it's very important to highlight the relationship that the staff of Patronato Lidia Coyola has made with the parents. Many of the parents, before the kids were inside this school, were mistreating their children. They didn't really know how to handle them. They didn't know how to educate them without violence. And now, because of this good relationship that Patronato has established with the kids, with the parents' kids, now they have come to understand how to educate them with non-violent practices. And I think domestic violence has been, at least here in Latin America, and I know in other parts of the world, has been a real issue. I think this is very important to take into account, because we want parents that are involved in the education of their children, but without making them feel bad or to put violence into their environment. So I think this is very useful as well. And I think also to clarify more on the internet or the access to these resources that Terry was asking, I think every community doesn't only have technology resources, but they have human resources. And I think in these moments of crisis is where organization, is where teaming up with other members of the community, it's very valuable. Definitely, we don't only, I know resources, material resources are very important, but that's not the only thing that it's important, and it's not the only resources that we can take advantage of these situations. So I think to research or to explore the human resources inside our communities has been really valuable in El Salvador, and can also be very valuable in other parts of the world. I hope I am responding the question with this.
No, excellent response, Adela. Thank you so much. And
I just want to add something briefly, if that is okay.
Yeah, please go ahead, man.
Yeah, the bandwidth is low, so the video is not on. I just wanted to point out that for some of the children of our partners, I don't think they had access to school before COVID. They don't have access to school right now, and they won't have access to school even after COVID. So that's the thing that I just wanted to point out. And this is especially true of a city like Jaipur, where most of the children are children of unorganized informal sector workers, domestic workers, construction workers, and most of them don't have access to school. So in fact, our friend Shahadat, who's working there, tries to spend all his time teaching them when he can, in the slum settlement itself. Speaking about Nepal, for example, school is out of the question because school is usually a 1 hour, 1.5 hour trek from their village. And because of COVID, they're not allowed to leave the village either. So they won't be going to school for a long time to come. They don't have access to internet, easy access to internet. And there are computers, there are cell phones, but they don't work. And to speak about what's happening in Gujarat in India, where Himmat is, many of the children who are in the village, the kids try to stay connected with each other. The older children are trying to teach the younger kids something, either within the family or in community. So in that way, there is an informal conversation going on. And actually, this is the time for kids to play back home in India, because April, May, and June are holidays here because of the heat. It's usually anywhere between 100 to 113 or 114 degrees Fahrenheit where we are working. So I just wanted to add this to bring in some kind of perspective of what the kids are facing in our region. Thanks.
Thank you, Mahesh. Anyone else? There's quite a few. I'm sorry, my head is down. I'm constantly looking at my phone on Facebook. There's all this chat going on in the background. A number of other people involved. Any other perspectives?
Sorry, Joe, I just wanted to add something else.
No apologies necessary. Please go.
Okay. I just wanted to add something else. I was thinking also in a very particular case here in El Salvador. So you know how social media can be used as well as a very dangerous platform, but it can also be used with positive purposes and with communitary goals. And so a member of a community in a very rural area here in El Salvador shared a picture of a young man climbing to a tree. I was trying to look for the picture, but I couldn't find it. I hope to share it later with all of you. But he was trying to climb, well, he climbed into the tree because that was the only way so that his computer had signal into his for his classes, you know. So so to be able to connect to his classes, he needed to climb all the way to the tree to access education, which should be accessible for everyone, you know. So this clearly it's just a show of social inequity and social injustice, I would say, also, because yes, of course, we are in times where we need technology, but many people do not have access to technology. So the local community gathered around, they organized to upload this picture and to demand to the government, especially to the local government, to help this kid and to help kids with the same situation. So part of the human resources that I was talking about inside our communities also needs to lead to organize to demand our rights as human beings to the local government and to the government. So fortunately for this family, for this kid, the result was very positive. Even the president, who I know has been in a lot of debates lately, and that I personally do not agree with a lot of things that he's doing, but this family was heard from the government and got help. I know that this is like a really small positive outcome, and it is not enough. The government needs to do more. It doesn't only, and I'm talking about government, not only referring to El Salvador's government, but in all parts of the world. So I really think that the government they need to understand that during this pandemic, it's not only necessary to take care of health. You know, we are human beings, and we are beings that are influenced by the environment, by health, by the economy, and education, culture, etc. So in any approach to this pandemic, to this health issue, we also need to take into account the other parts, the other elements that affect us as human beings. Not only closed us up in our homes, that's not enough. We need education, we need culture, we need feel close with other human beings. So we are integral human beings, so the response also needs to be integral.
Excellent. Thank you, Della, for that really important input. Anyone else? I think we could probably squeeze in one more question if we have a chance. Just want to check on Facebook one more time.
Joe, I think while you're checking Facebook,
Sure.
I just want to say, I mean, as one of the senior staff members at IPM, at the other spectrum of my work and career, I cannot be more impressed and appreciative to work with the colleagues that I work with. You know, certainly during my past 14 years, I've worked, excuse me, with a lot of people, you know, both not only colleagues, but donors and volunteers who have been with IPM since day one. And I have been in total awe of their commitment and what we've been able to do as an agency that's been around for 46 years now. But to come in every day and work with colleagues of this generation like Alyssa and Adela and Aneda and Vicky, and, you know, Mahesh and Sonia and everyone, their commitment, I cannot tell you what it means to me in terms of inspiration and the impact it's making on so many countless lives. And, you know, so many of you that I see on the Zoom call and on Facebook have been with us these past several weeks of this new forum. And we couldn't be more grateful for your investment of time and the care that you are giving through your participation and continued support. So thank you for being an inspiration to all of us at IPM and also for the impact that you're making on this world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilsa.
Oh, thanks, Ilsa.
I echo those sentiments completely. I'm sorry, did I? There are a number of other sort of conversations happening on Facebook. Julio Hernandez, who was with us in El Salvador with the United Methodist Church Office for Church and Global Society this past October, and I have been going back and forth, so I'll be following up with him or you, Julio, on Monday. Jim Kamphafner as well has made some excellent points, as well as Jim Keene, our former board chair. We heard from Terry. Mark Falbo's just asked a question about technology that I'll just try to answer quickly since we've talked about it. It's certainly our hope, and this is one of the things Sarah is the person that's working with us on grant seeking and proposal development, and I have been talking with Ilsa and others about, is trying to figure out through our existing and potential other donors, but our existing donor base in particular, how to leverage funding to provide the appropriate technological resources our partners in the regions need for laptops, phones, but most importantly, Wi-Fi connectivity. I was saying to somebody, Dan Moulthrop, actually at the City Club, and I were joking earlier this week about, you know, the whole idea that you can just give somebody a laptop, you know, and then there's no Wi-Fi. And it's just like what's, you know, the Cleveland Municipal School District, somebody's estimated that over half the kids don't have broadband at home. So if that's the reality in the United States, how in the heck are we going to deal with that in El Salvador, in Kenya, in India, some of the other countries we've been discussing this afternoon? Again, just quickly, that we're going to continue this virtual forum series next Friday, June 5th, with Aneda Ramos. It sounds like we'll be moving the forum up to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which will make it a little bit more convenient for those of you who are in India. Won't be the middle of the night. And unfortunately, a little earlier for those of you who are in El Salvador, San Francisco, or wherever you're all from. But Aneda has just spent, as Vicky mentioned last week, almost 2 months in quarantine in the Dominican Republic, having gone there to work with one of the IPM delegations from Stonehill College in Massachusetts, and our partners in the El Cercado region, Joanna Peterson, whom you know has been a project coordinator there literally for decades. And Uneida is going to be speaking about her experience with Vicky in greater detail in the really important work that's happening on the Dominican-Haitian border, where some of you have traveled with me, a really isolated and rural place where all kinds of issues now are being magnified because of the spread of the pandemic, particularly in the DR and on the coast and in the capital in particular. So she'll be joining us on June 5th, next Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. On June 12th, we'll be joined by, this is correct, Rodrigo, right, Ilsa? And I'm thrilled, we just confirmed that. Many of you know Rodrigo de Castro Amadea Perret is a Franciscan brother who's been working with the landless in Brazil for decades now. We've known each other since, frankly, my time in Rome, working with him there. And he's a member of the International Executive Board, very involved with Franciscans International in Geneva, and with human rights work around the situation related to the landless, but now the way that COVID is directly impacting particularly people in the major cities in Brazil on the coast, as you've seen, and in the Amazon, where much of the Franciscan Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Commission is working nationally to try to get the word out and get appropriate supplies to places that the dictator there has really been ignoring completely. On June 5th as well, we'll begin the first of what we believe, at least through August, will be weekly forums in Spanish. These will not be translated, but you're welcome to join us if you have Spanish fluency, you'd like to work on it, or you just want to see and hear what's happening there. There'll be probably more regular project partner participation, particularly from throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. And so the first one we're going to kick off on Friday, June 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern, so a little better time if you're on the West Coast. And Adela, who you've heard from today, who did a remarkable job kicking off this program in English almost a month ago now, will be presenting in Spanish next Friday at 2 o'clock. These forums are available via Zoom and on Facebook Live. We have them recorded if you'd like to request from Ilsa to get a copy from the office, or you can just go to Facebook, IPM's Facebook page, and watch them at your convenience. And please feel free to share them with as many people as you can as we continue to figure out what's the best way for IPM to be responding and to be acting, and most importantly, to be partnering with our brothers and sisters around the world during this time of pandemic. Carlos Martinez has also just sent a message saying that he's hoping to join us next week and looking forward to the Spanish language forum. So thank you all for being here, and may the peace that passes all understanding be with you throughout the weekend. Take care.